you might have. For example, how much do you need in order to retire comfortably? And so what we're going to do is use actual numbers. We use the actual historical returns to the S&P 500. Why? Because we have 100 years worth of data, and we simply project what similar returns might do for you in the future, given this much data. This is the actual data that we use. This is the returns for the S&P 500. We even include the depression type years in case things really fall apart. But even as recent as the year 2000, you can see we had 3 down years and down 37. They call that the Great Financial Crisis. What we want to do is run the numbers and answer this question. Do you really need $1 million to retire? That seems to be the goal that everybody's trying to shoot for, and people feel like they're a failure if they don't get there. But let's look at some recent statistics. I found this at Yahoo Finance. In 2023, the average American had 170,726 in retirement savings. That was a decrease from 191,000 at the beginning of 2022. What happened between end of 2022 and the end of 2023 that the value went down that much? Well, folks, if you look right here, we had a down year. That's all it took was one down year. But I want to really key on what they're saying here. They say the recommended amount would have been for the average retiree to be 555,000. They say only 12% of retirees got to that point. But that's a recommending. Notice they're not recommending $1 million. They're recommending 555,000. In fact, they say only a small percentage of people actually retire on $1 million. And if you look around, you see a lot of retirees that aren't really in food lines, and they have a lot less than this $1 million. They even have a lot less than 555,000, and they seem to be doing just fine. Not everybody, unfortunately, but let's go ahead and run some numbers to see how this actually works out. Okay, here we have the 555,000, which was the recommended amount. Not sure quite how they came up with that, but a lot of people recommend 10 times your ending salary. But anyway, let's go ahead and run that. Let's do a 60-40, the 60-40 recommended asset allocation. In other words, 60% staying in the S&P 500 so you can benefit when the market's going up like it inevitably does over the long term. In fact, 75 times in the last 100 years the market's up, where only 26 times was the market down. So we need to look at those numbers. We want to do a 3% COLA. And what we want to do is look at let's first of all look at the 8% withdrawal rule, which Dave Ramsey says we ought to be shooting for. So this is 8%. 8% would be 3,700 on this 555,000. What we want to do is run the numbers for every single year, and you can see how important the sequence of returns risk is. In other words, sequence of returns risk is how soon when you first retire do you hit these down years, because eventually down years will come, and when you hit them at the very beginning of your retirement, that's going to be really painful. But even this 8% withdrawal rule can be really painful. Let's go ahead and update this and show you what we're talking about. Folks, look at this. This right here is the percentage of the time in the last 100 years you would have had a problem. 62% of the time taking out this 8%. Let's look at the actual graph here, folks. It's quite eye-opening. 62% of the time you would have run out of money. Not that anybody ever runs out of money, because you'd cut back on expenses before you actually run out of money. But look at that, using the 8% rule. Well, let's consider one thing we haven't taken into account. Most people will take Social Security at some time during their retirement. What I want to do is show you the numbers. If you take say you're 62 and you have 555,000, and you take Social Security right at age 62, no longer do you need all that 3,700 coming out of your nest egg. You only need 3,700 minus the 1,890, which leaves 1,810, and we're going to increase that by 3% a year. And remember, Social Security also gives you a COLA. So what we want to do is update these numbers now and see what happens at 62% failure rate. I think you're going to be amazed. Look at this, folks. How many times did you run out of money? If we use the numbers for the last 100 years, after 20 years, 0% of the time. What's the key? You're no longer withdrawing 8% because you're getting some from your Social Security. In fact, you're getting about half from Social Security. You're down below the 4% rule. And when you stick close to the 4% rule, you do not have a problem. The only time you really have a problem, if you carry it out maybe 20, 28, 25, 26, 28 years, only in the years 1929 and 1930, Those are the times you see the problems. Here's the actual graph again, right here. No problem after 20 years. The only problem is when you have it after 30 years. Let's go ahead and go back to the table here. Now, what else could we possibly do? I just want to show you all the different variables that we can take into account here. One thing people recommend is when you have a down market, you don't continue to give yourself a 3% COLA. In fact, you even take a little bit of a cutback. But folks, if you're taking into account Social Security, you're already at a 0% failure rate. You got a 100% success rate after 20 years. Well, let's go ahead and update this a little bit. Let's say you want to know, well, can I live on $4,000? Now we're up to 4.56% failure rate. No longer is it just 1929. You can see the reds here going down through, or 1930. There's a few more years. Let me update this to show you what we're talking about. Now we're getting somewhat ahead of above the 4% rule, and that's going to affect this percentage after 20 years. Watch what happens. Okay, we've updated this. Now we've got 4% of the time, still a 96% success rate. Again, here's the graph. We have the Depression years, but now we see one other period in the last 100 years. If we have returns like we had in the year 2000, why? What happened in the year 2000? We had 3 down years, and then we had down 37%. So now we can see if we start getting much above the 4% rule, not only do we have problems in 1929 and 1930, now we're starting to have problems as recently as the year 2000. Let me go ahead and show you that real quick here. Now you're running out of money in 19 years if you took out 4.56%. But still, that's only in the year 2000. How about 2001? 2001, you're okay. 1999, you have 82,000 left after 20 years. So around the year 2000, we have problems. What happens if you think you need $4,500 a month? Now we're getting up to a 5.64% withdrawal rate. What happens when we update this to every single year? Now you can see we're up to 11% failure rate. You still have an 89% success rate, but you do have 11%. Let's look at the actual graph. That's the easiest way I know of to show you these numbers. During the Depression years and again around the year 2000, it's getting a little bit iffy along in here in the late 60s. Why? What was going on in that decade? We had 2 down years. The problem is when you have consecutive down years is when you start seeing some problems. If you're taking out, in this case, 5.64% of the of your nest egg, which would be 4,500 on a 555,000. Again, we're taking into account the Social Security. What else can we consider here? What happens if you begin taking Social Security a little bit later? Let's say, for example, you want to take Social Security. I'm just running at 2,700. I'm assuming that we're talking about a couple here. Maybe one spouse is 1,800 and the other one is 900. This is what you get at age 67. That's what your Social Security statement says when you add them both up. So at age 67, you get 2,700. But again, you don't get that if you take it at age 62. So if you take it at age 62, you get 70% of that. So you get 1,890. That's what I was running, 1,890. That's where I came up with that number. Well, what happens if you want to wait till age 65 to take Social Security? Again, I'm just showing you what we can do on this channel. Well, that's actually 3 years later. So instead of taking it in the first year, you take it in the 4th year. But we also take into account you're going to get more, which is also what we do on this channel. So what are you going to get more? This 2,700, which is the base amount you're going to get at age 67. If you take it at age 65, that's 3 years for this to grow. So at age 67, you're going to get 2,908. So 2,908. Now you're up to age 65. So you're no longer taking 70% of that. You're taking 86.67. So you're getting 2,520. So we need to change this number. If you're taking this to in the 4th year, 2,520. Let's go ahead and update this and see if this 11% loses ground or gains ground by waiting to take Social Security 3 years later. Realizing again, folks, that that's going to go up. At 2,700 you're looking at in the statement right now is going to grow. I just have it growing at 2.5%. So you're going to get 2,908 at age 67, but you're not taking it at age 67. You're taking age 65. So that's why it's lower. You're getting 2,520. So let's go ahead and update this and see if these numbers change at all. Okay, you see we lose a little bit more ground. Now 19% of the time you're losing ground. Why? Because those initial 3 years right here, you're taking out 9.73%. Now, when Social Security kicks in, when your age turns 65, now you're down to 4.87% withdrawal rate. But 19% of the time, if you wait, now you got a problem during depression years. You got a problem around 73, 74, especially the late 60s, and you also got a problem right there. But folks, most every other scenario, you're just fine. Can you live with an 81% success rate? This shows you what you would have. 46% of the time, you'd have over $500,000. Remember, after 20 years, remember you're starting out with 555,000, taking out this kind of money. Well, that shows you what we can do on this channel. What's something else you could do? Watch what happens. Right now, 19%. You may not feel comfortable with that. Watch what happens if we change something. Watch what happens if in down years you no longer get to 3% COLA, you actually take 3% less. Instead of increasing it by 3%, what we're going to do is, if I can get this to move, do 5%. You're going to do negative 2%. I want to update this and see if this changed at all. What that means is whenever the market's going down, you no longer increase what you took the previous year by 3%. You take 2% less than what you took, trying to mitigate this number right here, maybe raising that a little bit. Let's see if it helps any. Look at that, folks. That's called dynamic withdrawal strategy, where you in down years you take out less, you don't keep the COLA. Look at that, folks. Now only 2% of the time you run out of money. You begin with that 9.73% withdrawal rate for those first 2 years, but then you knock it down right here and you're down to a 2% failure rate. In other words, 97.5% of the time, you would not run out of money using the numbers for the last 100 years. But folks, that's what we do on this channel. We run all kinds of different numbers. We look at asset allocation. We look at your COLAs. We look at when you get Social Security, how much you get from Social Security, and obviously how much you're taking out. Right now, we were taking out $4,500, which is way more than the 8%. We're up to 9.73. But since Social Security kicks in, this is the kind of money you can look at when you cut back on your COLA and actually have to take a negative COLA in down years. Folks, that's what we do on this channel. We love running numbers for people. Please consider subscribing. Please share. Please like these videos. And we'll keep coming out with more and more videos, running numbers for you, just showing some different things that you can do. You don't need to get to $1 million necessarily. That's the question. Do you really need that much? But what happens if we use the numbers that they recommended, 555,000? Well, we look at those numbers and we ran the numbers and we changed a few variables here, and you can see how often you'd have a success rate. Just going to a negative COLA, cut that from a 19% failure rate to only a 2% failure rate. Again, thanks so much for watching. Please share this channel with others. Let people know about this channel. I love running numbers, running all kinds of different scenarios. This should show you where you might be in the future. It really helps to see actual numbers, what would have happened, and we project ahead what might happen in the future based on what's happened the last 100 years. Thanks for watching.